Kia ora koutou, talofa lava. My name is Denise Arnerich. I am a curriculum manager at the Ministry of Education in Wellington, and it's my pleasure to introduce the next keynote speaker to you. Rosemary Hipkins is a chief researcher at the New Zealand Council for Educational Research. She is responsible for research in areas of curriculum and assessment, with a particular interest in how the key competencies in the New Zealand curriculum are understood and enacted. Scanning Rose's 12-page bio on the NZCER website says it all. Over 100 research reports, conference papers, journal articles, and classroom resources in the last 10 years. So clearly Rose is a prolific researcher, but it's the quality of her engagement and interaction relating to this research I especially want to comment on. Rose is a sense maker, a deep inquirer. She embodies the spirit, the big ideas of curriculum change in her work and her interactions with educators, whether classroom teachers or policy leaders. She's called on regularly to work with educators at all levels of the education system and to enact this knowledge in 21st century New Zealand education. She talks about this as the washback of research into practice, the doing. The spirit of our New Zealand curriculum allows for a holistic approach to curriculum. It invites us to consider the interconnected nature of knowledge and build the capabilities for living and lifelong learning. We call these the key competencies. Rose has co-led a new development for the Ministry of Education, integrating science and capabilities development, which we're close to launching, and this is a wonderful example of connected curriculum. This is big idea change and needs ongoing investment and leadership from researchers like Rose and engagement from educators like you. I know today Rose is going to challenge you with some ideas, or these ideas as art educators, and it is my very real pleasure to introduce her to do that right now. Rose Hipkins.
Kia ora koutou. What I want to do today is just actually, hopefully, to pick up a phrase from John this morning, help you to see the curriculum with new eyes, because anything to do with the schooling sector, all of us come to with baggage from our own schooling, and that's the same for me, of course. So I thought that I would start off by challenging you to think about this a little bit. What do the words school curriculum mean to you? Just tell the person sitting next to you the idea, the one main idea that pops first into your head when you see those words. Somebody want to be brave enough to share? Somebody, yes. Sorry? Rules. Oh, that's a good one. Someone else? Subjects, yes. Most of all, yeah, right up the back. Sorry? NCEA credits, yes. It was almost inevitable, wasn't it? So, subjects, first of all, maybe at least here we've got something a wee bit sort of contemporary looking in terms of the presentation. Incidentally, I'm going to show you 4 images. For some people, the school curriculum is still this: English, maths, and history. And you might like to think what those subjects have in common, something more strictly academic, perhaps. Subjects like those leave the arts curriculum, for instance, where? On the periphery. How about this one? A slightly broader curriculum, but still mainly a division of subjects, and we've even got an apple for the teacher. How's that for a cliche? in the first 10 there was this image, which is getting somewhere a little bit more interesting. Some interconnections between things. If you could see that bigger, there are several different languages or symbols for languages on those pieces. And one final one, because this is getting slightly closer to what I want to talk about, it's the cover of a book, but it's the title of it that interested me. The cover itself's not exactly riveting, but the title of this book is Designing a School Curriculum. Now, if you think about subjects and look at those top images, you could say to yourself, what's to design? Because the subjects of the traditional curriculum come ready-made, don't they? And so when we think those words curriculum, we have bits called subjects, and we've heard that, and bits called subjects that have to be assessed by bits that we call NCEA standards, dividing them up a bit more. A sequence in which you have to learn those bits, and they're things that somebody, but who, thinks are important, and a one-size-fits-all exercise, a curriculum for everybody, to which people measure up or not. Now, how many people would say that the curriculum of their schooling was characterised pretty broad? You might disagree with the odd bit of it, but have I just accurately described how you would think about the curriculum of your schooling? Put up your hand if you think that's, yeah. Okay, that's fairly telling, isn't it? So, you might say, what's different now? We've got a curriculum now, the New Zealand curriculum. How many of you think you know a lot about this curriculum? A smattering of hands, a moderate amount about this curriculum. Absolutely nothing about this curriculum. That's where the majority of hands are. Well, let me tell you that how I've just characterised curriculum is not what this document is about. It's called the New Zealand curriculum, but it does have the bits in the back end that you might expect to see, only they're called learning areas rather than subjects per se. There are 8 of them, of which the arts is one. This is something that is more a framework of bespoke pieces, and the art of designing a curriculum for a school now, if people understand it this way, and that is a fairly big if, is that they have to take these pieces and build a curriculum for the students in their school that actually fits the learning needs of the students in their school. So the art of designing this curriculum lies in who does the weaving, how the parts get put together, and whether the whole adds up to more than the sum of the parts. Now, that's a very sophisticated exercise in curriculum thinking, and not all the people in schools that you talk to would understand it this way yet. We've been on a long journey with this curriculum. We've had it for a few years now. Some people understood it this way from the start. Others are only beginning to open the door a crack to see what this is all about. So I'm going to give you a little taste of that now, but the first thing that I want to say about it is that how you read this curriculum, our research has shown, depends on one cogent set of personal beliefs. And so now just think about this for a minute before I flick on to the next slide. You're all arts educators, so you'll probably have a very particular way of answering this question. What is learning at school for? Why do we think it's so important that we have a social contract as taxpayers to pay for it, to send all our kids to school, in New Zealand still free for most of them? Why? What is it for? Okay, let me just show you an image created by one of my younger colleagues, Rachel Bolstab, whose work on the arts in the curriculum and its learning benefits you may have seen. There's a summary on the table outside. So, do you stand at A? Now, it's probably fairly obvious to you that Rachel doesn't, by the way she's oriented the perspective on this diagram here. Or do you stand at B? Rachel would put herself very firmly at B, as I would actually. But a lot of schools and teachers stand at A, and the curriculum that you've just thought about and I've just briefly characterised as a traditional curriculum is very much a curriculum positioned from the perspective of somebody standing at A, when the purpose for which you go to school is so you can do other things. And I still have teachers, often I argue with teachers about this. My own background, as Denise said, is in science, and there are some lingering elements of traditional thinking, it's probably fairly fair to say, in the science teacher community. And so I would say, well, why do you have to learn this? My first degree was in genetics, and one of the subjects, very beloved of biology teachers, I'll be interested in how many of you had to learn this at school, still in the school curriculum, mitosis and meiosis. Who remembers learning that stuff? Did it make any sense? Did you know why you were learning it? If I challenge biology teachers about this, oh, you have to know that so you can learn this. And then you have to know this so you can learn this. And so it goes. And I say to teachers, if the most important reason that you can give me for somebody learning something is so they can learn something else and something else, and there is no other reason, then time's a wasting. And it's a big, complex world out there that our kids have to negotiate and navigate, and we cannot squander this precious time that we give them at school doing that. So we have to put their needs for the future in the foreground of learning. And we have a curriculum that does that, so long as people understand that that's what it does do. It comes with certain challenges, however, because, of course, first and foremost, there isn't one way to do this. So, people who are beloved of comparisons, and goodness knows, with league tables and things, it would seem that a lot of our community is beloved of comparisons. How can you say School A is better than School B if the curricula that they're offering are very different from each other? There are quite a lot of challenges in here, but anyway, I'm not going to get bogged down in those. Let me show you the pieces. This is what's in the framework. And the art of weaving or designing a curriculum for your school is in how you put these pieces together. Now, I'm telling you this because I think that there is some potential for some rich linking between the work that you do in your community programs and the work that's done in the school program. But how well you can reach out or accept and build on the tentative overtures from schools out to you, and I'll come to that in a minute, depends on how well you get to understand these pieces. There's a vision. I'm going to show you the vision statement in a minute, or at least the top level of it. There's a set of principles, a set of values. There's some advice on the sort of teaching and learning that should happen. That word pedagogy at the bottom, I promised Denise it wasn't here. I forgot it was in this diagram. A lot of people grumble about it and say, why do you use that word when teaching would do? Well, actually the word teaching wouldn't do. This is one of these words that has a much bigger and more expansive meaning than teaching. It means teaching and the set of relationships between the teacher and the learner that go with it. So you can see that's actually a much more expansive idea than just being about what the teacher does. And the learning area statements, which I've already mentioned. So, you might think, okay, lots of different ways to put this together, sort of signalled by the arrows here. How well are schools understanding this? Well, I can tell you that there's a little problem, and our research shows this very clearly. And the problem is that this is a document of two halves. So what we've got is a very visionary front of the curriculum. And when you hear people say that the New Zealand curriculum is world leading, and it is, what they're mostly talking about is the front part of it. And I'll show you the vision, the values and the principles in a minute, and I'm going to talk more specifically about the key competencies. And when you are focusing on these pieces, they're so wonderful that you'd have to be pretty churlish not to like them. It's kind of like a what's not to like scenario. So of course people like it. Right from the start of when it was first made, people have liked it. But The trouble is, it was developed in two different ways. This wonderful part of the curriculum at the front was built by a lot of people working together and working backwards and forwards between them, which is how it came out to be so interesting, have such interesting ideas in it. Meanwhile, we had a revision of all the 1990s curriculum documents, and the brief to the people who wrote the learning area statements was to streamline and revise them. So we've got a little mismatch between this old idea of curriculum that we started with, the parcelled up bits of subjects, and this new idea of curriculum being what you wrap around the child to meet their learning needs, to take them forward into their futures. Now, it's never going to be easy to stitch those two bits together. That's a huge challenge for all of us who work with young people to do that. Our curriculum doesn't do it very well yet, but the second-tier materials that are coming along are starting to do that. So I said I'd show you the pieces. So I'm going to start with the vision, and I'm just going to flick the words of it up in a minute. Of course, words are only words, but you have a look at them and think about the work that you do in your programs and think about the potential to build some bridges to all these things. This is what the vision statement for New Zealand's curriculum says. You'd be pretty churlish, wouldn't you, if you wanted to put a red pen through any of those things. They're good things everybody would aspire for our young people to be, but wishing doesn't make it so. This is only the vision. How do you achieve the vision? Because the devil's always in the details. You would probably aspire to similar things for your young people. So we have this marvellous vision, which is fully congruent with the vision that I'm sure that you would share for our young people. But how do we achieve it? Now, if you think about that for your own work, there's absolutely no doubt that participating in the arts can help young people to develop that sort of vibrant and engaged sense of themselves and connection to people and place, all those things that were there, confident, connected, actively involved, lifelong learners. And that participatory ethos of having the young people in there, not just taking part, but helping to determine the direction, to be a part of the participation is taking the lead and having their ideas listened to and being part of that process of making the learning take shape. But how do we make what you're aspiring to do, and some teachers at school, because not all of them, we still have a lot of teachers in, not just in the secondary sector, but perhaps more in the secondary sector, who hold that traditional subject-based view of curriculum. And of course that's not irrational, because we do still have high-stakes assessment at the end of secondary schooling, and it is still organised that way. And indeed, when we think back over the years of the NCEA, which is our first attempt to actually break that very subject-focused, one-size-fits-all stranglehold on high-stakes assessment at the end of school, when we think about the risks around that, we look at about the controversy that surrounded the NCEA in its first years, it is right that we have to move a little bit cautiously, but the curriculum is moving, and we need it to move further. But how do you reach out and do that joining? This is where I want to show you the principles of the curriculum. They are described in the curriculum document as the foundation on which schools make their decisions about their school curriculum. There are 8 of them, and here they are, down the side there. Now, you would expect to see some of those things there. We would hope that every school would hold high expectations for every one of its students. We would also know realistically that that's probably not quite the case, but we would hope for it and all those other good things. But one of those principles is community engagement, which is why I put it in red, because here's the opportunity for building bridges both ways between programs in the community that work with young people and the good intent of what schools need to do, especially given that the aspirations of your work and the aspirations of the school curriculum are strongly in alignment with each other. So, if we stop playing with the abstract and get specific, let's actually talk about a specific program in the arts. And so those of you who are involved in it will know from the name of the award which program this is. Cheese on Toast, what's that an award for? It's a music competition. Where I got these images from was from the Play It Strange website, which is a songwriting competition, as some of you probably do know, but perhaps we're a bit shy to say. Now, this is interesting. Play It Strange is a school-based program, as I understand it, but it has that potential to connect outwards because people from the arts help to organise Play It Strange for the schools. So these students can take their awards, like this girl very proudly holding her Cheese on Toast award here, and take them back into school and put them in their school portfolio. But what about the successes that they achieve in your programs? Do the schools know about what the young people that you work with are achieving? Is there a way to take that the outcomes of their learning suitably acknowledged back into their record of learning at school? Now, you might be feeling a bit cynical at the moment and sitting there and saying, well, would the school welcome it? Would they want to know? I have actually had people who work with student databases talking to me about this very problem, a very challenge. I shouldn't call it a problem because it's a wonderful challenge, really. How do we build those bridges both ways so that the whole of a young person's learning is acknowledged and becomes part of their record of learning? Now, the vision that I showed you before is for our young people to be confident, connected, actively involved, lifelong learners. And we could also add to that, another jargon word in a way, but it fits the idea of what I'm trying to talk about, life-wide. Because you don't only learn at school. You're not at school for more than however many hours it is in a day. It's about a third of your time in the day that you're at school, and that's not every day of the week, and there are the holidays and so on. So there's a possibility. Can you find ways to build bridges back to school for young people to take their significant learning from your projects back into their evidence of learning, given that there's such a strong fit, at least with the high-level parts of the curriculum and the things that you're wanting to do? One of the pitfalls, of course, would be whether you'd see schools welcoming that. Learning achievements in the arts. There are several other principles that you might want to think about. I've mentioned the one of community engagement, but learning to learn is one. And the school curriculum does have this very future-focused sensibility. Future focus is, as I've already said, one of the 8 principles that are in there. And there are the values. And you'll see a certain amount of repetition between those and the principles. They're the ones in red there at the bottom. Incidentally, if you're wondering who would have the temerity to prescribe a national set of values for a school curriculum, I can tell you that this was one of the consensus parts of the curriculum. And where these came from was a researcher called Paul Kewen from the University of Waikato was contracted to go right round the country and consult with groups of people, large and small, everywhere, and then to distill the results of that consultation. And he came up with what he called this set of big tented values. And by that he meant that there's a lot of accommodation under them for them to play out and be interpreted in different ways. And when he presented this work back to the high-level group that created the front end of New Zealand's curriculum, this was the one and only time over meetings that happened regularly over a space of 2 or 3 years that I saw this happen. Everyone in the room stood up and gave him a standing ovation for doing this piece of work and managing to bring that project successfully to this conclusion. So those are there for working with, and they are there for to be modelled for young people, but also for them to work with, to discuss, to debate, to learn about as values. That's a wee bit different from learning history And it's not to say that maths and so on, and it's not to say that those things are not important. Of course they're important. But when you put them together with these other deeper, profounder insights, you start taking the school curriculum to some place that's designed to open up young people's horizons. David Perkins, who's an American psychologist who works out of Harvard University and has worked on thinking in the school curriculum for a long time, talks about helping students learn to play the hidden game of learning. And by that he means learning how the power structures of the world operate, learning, if you're a kid from a deprived background, how knowledge operates, not just what it is, but how it works and who says so and what gives it its power in the world. This is the piece particularly of my specialist learning, which is the key competencies in the curriculum. Now, you may or may not have picked it up from what Denise said before. This is an actual page from the curriculum document, and the piece I've got circled in blue at the top there, unless you've got extremely sharp eyes, and sharper than my tired old eyes, you probably can't read it. And I deliberately made it quite small so you can't read it, because I show this to people in schools, school leaders, principals, teachers, and I say to them, what do those words say? Now, if I ask them what are the key competencies, they'd string off the names of them, no problem at all. If we focus on learning, not just on stuff that kids need to know, which is where we started this talk, but on their capabilities, then we ask a very powerful and different set of questions about their learning. But there's a very big proviso here, only if we shift our view of what learning is. So at the start, I talked about needing to reset our view of what curriculum is. I think we also need to do an equally powerful reset of what we think learning is. So I'm going to get you to talk to each other again just for a minute. And what I want you to talk about is this wonderful image here, which, looking at its artistic style, looks like the Coles Funny Picture Book of my childhood. So we're probably sort of talking the late 40s, the early 1950s, I would say. And the fact that it says up the top there in the year 2000, probably looking 50 years ahead. Here's a vision of a class of kids learning. What's wrong with this view of learning? Okay, who's going to be brave enough to share an idea? They can only receive. Now, that's quite a shocking idea now, isn't it? I doubt very much that there would be anybody now who held a vision of learning as a one-way process. We think about the interactivity of learning very, very differently from that. Anything else? The teacher is totally in charge of the learning agenda. Yeah. Again, we would see a much more participatory ethos, and certainly today's sessions have shown that it's almost a given now, isn't it? What else? They're all getting the same stuff, and there's an implication that they'll understand it in the same way. Very creative, wonderful. Wishful thinking, I suspect. Anyway, enough. Enough for you to realise that our sensibility about what learning is, the other thing I'd say is what a solitary activity it's portrayed as. Whereas I'm sure for most of you, yes, we do some aspects of our learning solitarily because there is still some engagement that we need to do on our own as individuals as we do our own personal sense making. But so much of our identity as learners, of the interactions that help us to learn, happen in situations where we're interacting with other people, that to show it as a solitary passive activity like that is very misguided, we would think of it now. We've moved a long, long way from that vision of learning. And the key competencies in the school curriculum, and indeed the whole of the front of the school curriculum, encompasses that sensibility if you read it that way. Unfortunately, that's a big if, because those ideas, when you see them in a cartoon like that, it's very obvious what's wrong with that vision. But actually, if you're not having something put in front of you that makes you think critically about it, because it was the way that most of us were taught, perhaps not quite as extreme as that, but certainly with a lot of those assumptions behind it, it tends to be our tacit way of thinking about what learning is. And so when something comes along that challenges that, or could challenge that, it's very easy to warp it back into a traditional way of thinking. One of the things that I think that we didn't do so well with our curriculum, and I now see as unfortunate, but it's happened, the key competencies were based on an OECD project called DESICO, defining and selecting competencies. And the question that they asked themselves was, what does every young person in every society have to be capable of in order that they can live a successful life in a society that functions well? And that's their definition. There's a line of critique at that, and you might like to engage with this critique, that says who defines what's a successful life, and is success in life the best measure of harmoniousness? But I'm not going to go there today. It's a really interesting argument to be had. That's what they did. Their purpose in doing it was to get a set of common types of outcomes that they could use for their international testing regime called PISA, Program of International Student Assessment. That's what motivated them to do it. But the key competencies have been picked up all around the world. You can see the names that they gave them on one side. Now, you'll know as well as I that in New Zealand, we have this kind of cultural cringe about jargon, about technical language, and so on. And what happened in the process of our curriculum getting constructed is the names got changed. So, for instance, what the OECD called functioning and socially heterogeneous groups. Now, you might like to think about from the perspective of your arts what's involved in that. Relating to others is a very thin translation of that, and in fact is only one aspect of it. Similarly, acting autonomously while managing self, which is the key competency that got mentioned before, is only one little slice of that. And so I can tell you from my research what's happened a lot in the school curriculum when people don't understand the key competencies as being about building students' capability, when they understand them in a traditional view of learning and in a traditional view of curriculum, managing self becomes the new policeman. And so I like to use the metaphor of learning to drive. And if you're lucky enough to learn to drive with a driving instructor, first of all, you start in a dual-controlled car, yeah, or used to. I don't know if kids do still now, in the days when you had to think about steering and changing gears and braking and everything else. And the driving instructor could actually operate the clutch and even the gears if they absolutely had to, if you got into a sticky situation. Now, you're learning to drive, but you're not managing yourself as a driver until that crutch is taken away. So if you have a school program in which people say they're training students to manage themselves, they are not yet self-managing, because until they can autonomously manage their actions and behaviours, like the person who can drive a car without the crutch of the dual drive, then they are not developing the capabilities that are intended by this. Another metaphor that I use quite a lot is the iceberg. And generally speaking, when people describe managing self in terms of getting to class on time, having their gear, having their pens and pencils, keeping their hands to themselves, not poking their next door neighbour, blah, 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 all those kind of things, that's like the tip of the iceberg, the top 10%. Down here further are some of those identity things that are in the vision statement of developing yourself as a resilient learner who can pick yourself up and try again when it gets hard, who has the sense that you can be a learner even if it's tough at the moment or things are going wrong in your life and so on. Another one, this is kind of, no more than 3 metaphors, I promise. Using language, symbols and texts. For a time in our curriculum, that was called meaning making. And that was derided by some people as being so obviously what learning was about. I think that was a shame. I think we missed an opportunity, because meaning making is a very profound activity, and it is not just about understanding the meaning that somebody else intended you to make, which is what people who derided it thought it was about. One of the metaphors that I use for that one has been like deconstructed garments or post-industrial buildings. In deconstructed garments, the seams are on the outside, and that piece of cloth doesn't go round those bulges because it does automatically. It does because there's a dart here and a seam there. And you can see them, and you can see how that garment has been made. Or in the building, you can see where the pipes are. You can see how that building functions. It's a bit like that, letting kids in onto the secrets of how meaning is made in the world in different learning areas. That's the deeper intention of that key competency. It has a very strong semiotic potential that the arts have a huge amount to contribute to, I think. Framing key competencies as capabilities demands that the school curriculum that schools build asks, what are our young people capable of? What can they do? Not what can't they do, what do we need to top them up with, but what can they do, and where can that foundation take them? What do they hope to become capable of in their futures? Now, I picked this image because it's a wonderful image, but because I also want to tell you a story, which is one of the key competency stories on a website that you can look at. This story comes from an Auckland school, a South Auckland school. It's Alfriston College. I'll name it because it was named in the original research project that this came from. They did some research around their 3-day learning episodes. I'm not sure if they're still doing them, but at the stage where they were doing them, I met this wonderful young Tokelauan teacher. She was only in her 2nd year of teaching, and we'd designed some curriculum design principles for them to use to embed those wonderful things that I told you about from the curriculum into their 3-day episodes, not necessarily into subjects, but into the school curriculum in its broadest sense. And this young teacher really got it. She really understood it. 2 terms running, the first term she called the 3-day episode she designed King of Kings, and it was only for boys from Tokelau, from her own background. This next term, she did the same thing again. She called it Sons of the Pacific, and she opened it up to boys from any of the Pacific cultures, of which they have quite a number at Alfriston, as you can imagine. And what she wanted them to do over the course of the 3 days, starting from scratch, was to design a performance that they would perform at the end of the 3rd day for their peers in the school, for parents, for anybody else who wanted to come and listen. She wanted to have, the first one was straight Tokelau, and the second one had elements of all their Pacific cultures. They all had to take a turn in being the leader and working with the other students, building up to the performance. And they all had to take a turn in leading the reflection on what they were learning about themselves as capable and competent learners. And what we found in the evaluation after those episodes was that that washed right back into their classroom learning. And some of these boys had been what you might think of as problem students before. They started to walk very tall round the school and to have a much more engaged sense of themselves as people for whom there was a place at school, who could learn in their subjects and settle down and stop mucking around in class. Now, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. You know that this is the power of the arts, but there is a place for this sort of highly engaged learning that takes something that kids are already very strong, confident and capable in, and uses it to push them further, to build themselves, sense of themselves as learners. How can you take some of that sense from your program back to conversations with schools. If you want to read this story, this is the website that it's on, but if you just keyed in key competencies and effective pedagogy, down the side there, if you can read the names of those stories, it's the third one down, Pacifica dance performance. And there are 16 of these stories there, and they illustrate the multi-layered, sophisticated and complex nature of the key competencies as leading teachers understand them and are enacting them in the school curriculum. So if you want to understand more about them, you can go to that website and have a look at them. There's only 2 arts-related stories there because across the whole 16 they had to cover all 8 learning areas of the curriculum. The other one happens to come from the Play It Strange music competition. Again, a teacher working with very troubled young people who are often trouble at school. And she was a teacher who had in her background English teaching and music. And what's described there is the process that she went through to help those young people to become songwriters and enter their songs in the Play It Strange competition. What we found was what all these teachers were doing was that they were making that participatory space for students to take the initiative in their learning. They were challenging them to really stretch their current capabilities, and they were building rich connections between the students' lives, what they can do already and what they could perhaps do, what they were capable of being and becoming in their futures. And that's right across the learning areas. Go and have a look at the maths story. It's an absolute inspiration. There's at least one story for every learning area there. Now, those are things that probably if I asked you what your purposes were in your program, you might not have said them in exactly quite those words, but I bet that they would be the things that resonate with what you do. So the promise and potential of our school curriculum is very congruent with the promise and the potential of the community arts that you do with and for the young people that you work with. A rich and vibrant curriculum can only be built by all of us working together. And you know, we don't want our young people just to be coming to the future. When you think about what's happening in the world and some of the downright scary social changes that are happening in the world, we need our young people to be future builders. We need them not to come passively into their futures, but actively and with a sense that they have the agency to shape the futures that they're making for themselves and their children and for the world that I hope we still have. John said this morning we have to keep pushing, we have to find ways to say yes. My challenge to you is to find ways to push for some of this rich vibrancy of the school curriculum, which will be so enriched by the work that you do. I know that bridge building isn't a one-way exercise and it has to go both ways, but please say yes. Please find a way to take the richness and potential of what you do to the people in schools who will be more than ready to reach out to you, because all of us have to build this curriculum together if we're going to make it work. Thank you very much.